curious if anyone wants to jam this in the community calls chat. Just curious, anyone from the Coordinape side, if you've heard of KPI options before, maybe what you know about them. I'd just love to hear kind of what the audience awareness level is before we jump in.
This is Zach. All of my awareness comes from our conversations, which is what sort of sparked me to really want to invite you to come share more with the team about them and how they work. The KPI options, I'm not as clear on. Actually, I'm excited to learn along with everybody else. But the idea behind a sort of KPI based circle in Coordinape is one that was super intriguing to me.
Cool.
I was also intrigued when I heard about it from Zach, and I was in your airdrop, I think, last year or whenever that happened. So I did fiddle around a bit with your product, so I have a little bit of understanding.
Nice. And Zach, there's not really a big difference between KPI options and the KPI plus Coordinape round design. It's really the same thing.
Yeah, I think I think we can sort of jump in now. Sorry if I was running around and on mute a little bit, but are we waiting for more people before we get kicked off?
Yeah, I was going to give us 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we can get started. I think 1 minute will be 5 minutes, and that was usually how long it takes people to trickle in from the various places after they get their servers. So after they get their notification, or if they read their tweet or saw it.
Right. Or after they got off their last meeting and are jumping into this one.
Yeah, probably the more common occurrence.
As is the case of me, right?
I was sharing to Reese how much I like the background music. Oh, I don't hear it anymore. You must have paused it. Do you not keep it on during the talking?
I don't. Yeah, no. I turn it off normally when the call gets kicked off, but I turned it down pretty low.
Yeah, I can still hear it. Sounds like some sort of Creedence Roadhouse rock.
Let's see what it is.
Like no bad news. It's the name of the song.
Yep. Yes. Wiz.
Yeah.
Banger.
Yep.
I don't hear it anymore. What's that?
Yeah. I still hear it.
You may have turned the Caesar the Coordinape down.
No, I can't hear it now, but I had to double the volume.
How do we turn Caesar off?
You want him off? We'll turn him off.
Yeah, let's turn him off.
Okay. So, without further ado, thank you guys for joining us. Clayton, welcome to the Coordinape community call. For those of you who are Coordinapes and don't know Clayton, Clayton is working with UMA and with the 0x outcome protocol, and they are trying to bring KPIs to Coordinape and into just making us a little bit better at doing DAO stuff. So, Clayton or Zach, you guys will take the lead here, and I'll back off.
Sure. I can kick off, Zach, unless you wanted to add some context or something.
No, only context is stoked to have you here and encourage folks to use the chat to ask questions or comments or things like that. But yeah, take it away, Clayton.
Cool. Yeah, please do drop comments in the chat. Sometimes it's like you're talking to this bunch of people, but you don't know how it's being received. So particularly questions if I brush over something too fast. So yeah, appreciate the opportunity to attend this call and to share a little bit about what we're up to. I think the way Reese put it is awesome. We want to do DAO stuff better. I think that pretty much encapsulates what's up. It actually encapsulates this outcome finance goal, right? We help DAOs generate positive outcomes. So I'm going to try to keep it pretty lightweight. The thing that I want people here to walk away from is with literally is just kind of what a KPI option is, what that token is, and then we can kind of hang out and brainstorm about how it might relate to Coordinape. So I'll start out with that. I'll also talk a bit about how we've used the two together. So I'm doing a very like low effort presentation here where I'm just like highlighting different parts of a web page. So KPI options are these tokens that first got launched by UMA. And there's kind of different ways to understand them, but essentially I think the easiest way to understand them is kind of like a smart airdrop where you give out these tokens to people and you say, hey, here's these free tokens. Their value is going to depend on a particular metric that you specify at a future date. And so instead of just giving people straight UMA tokens, we give them these KPI options that will be redeemable at that future date that we choose and based on the metric. And so a really easy example here is just like TVL. We've done this before with UMA. You get this KPI option and we've parameterized it such that if it's up to 100 million in TVL, maybe each one is worth one UMA, and if it's 50 million in TVL, each one's worth half an UMA. So that's basically the high level of a KPI option. Here's the view. If you're looking at my shared screen, here's the view on the outcome.finance website. I do realize it's a little confusing to have two brands. I don't want to get lost in the weeds here about that. We basically just spun off a second brand so we could have more clarity. But that's not the right thing. Hold on. Just want the concept is the important thing here. So another way of thinking of KPI options, you set a goal, you mint the tokens, you launch them. The important thing here too is like when a DAO mints these tokens, they lock their native token in the contract and they mint these KPI options. After the campaign is over and they mature and the recipients can claim their reward, the remaining collateral is available for the DAO to reclaim. So it just goes back to the DAO. And so what's cool about this is essentially the DAO doesn't really risk anything in terms of assuming that they were willing to pay what they promised for the outcome. So if you say you want 100 million TVL and it's worth one UMA times how many over tokens, if you don't get there, if you made it binary, but if you made it linear, if you made it binary and you don't get there, well, you don't lose anything. You don't pay any UMA out for it. And so that's the basic foundation of the KPI option idea. Zach, do you want to maybe this is the stuff I, breathe every day. So I might have skipped over some details. Is there maybe something you think I'm missing there or a question you have?
No, not right now, but also obviously welcome the audience to share any as well.
Yeah.
I kind of have a question.
Don't be shy. Sure.
So the KPIs are measured by how do you find a thing that is measurable for some of the softer things that you may be asking DAO contributors to do? Does that make sense?
Sure. Yep, it does make sense. There's different ways to approach this. We're actually moving away from that a little bit. We're trying to sort of go towards some of the more clear-cut things in the near term. It's difficult, right, to measure. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Some of the softer things. I think KPI options are best used to measure protocol metrics, and this is kind of like why I'm excited about a relationship between Coordinape and KPI options. Is that the social attestation piece would hopefully measure that a little bit. And so just that, right? You have the Coordinape decides how many each person gets, and then the payout is based on the success of the protocol. So it is sort of better suited to protocol outcomes, on-chain outcomes, not only on-chain, but somewhat straightforward metrics. However, we have experimented with the more flexible ones. They just take kind of a lot of work to parameterize. And so some example of these softer ones have been Bankless DAO used KPI options to encourage some authors to write a legal document, and they sort of came up with a way to measure the quality of it, and that went well. We've also done one that was based on the number of retweets that a particular tweet got, and that was cool. Some of the really softer things can be tough, though. You tend to want to try to find a more measurable proxy that might measure those softer things.
That makes sense.
And that can even be like a committee, for lack of a better word, or something that basically gives a thumbs up to whether the KPIs have been achieved.
Yes, yeah, it can. As you move in that direction, you sort of lose some of the trustware, the trustlessness piece of it. But you're right, and typically that's actually okay. And so then you do have, it's like slightly more socialware, to use Orca's lingo, if you do the committee model, but it still allows you to maintain these tradable tokens and have clear expectations and things like that.
Right.
Hey.
So thanks for that question. Any more questions? I'm going to go ahead and talk about the super Umans. So this is the community in UMA's. It's an evangelist DAO. There's several super Umans in this call right now. It has a relationship to the foundation that supports UMA, and that foundation, called Risk Labs, has issued different KPI options over the past year. And so the thing that I like about KPI options is this shared incentive model. So I talk a lot about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation when I think about community leading. Essentially, you don't want to pay people for every little thing that they do, because people don't do things just for payouts, right? They do things to feel useful, to feel helpful, to feel like good people. And when you actually pay people for something they want to do, it actually reduces their trigger and their impulse to do it naturally. What I like about KPI options is it does benefit the individuals. So they do get payouts for these things, but they do it as a community. And so when they sort of make a win, so imagine we're talking about a community using Coordinape, maybe they go and make an integration or they bring in some TVL. They're going to go back and excitedly share that with the community. Well, then the community is like, not just like, oh, you got something for yourself, like a bounty, right? It's like, oh, you did this thing that just increased the value for all of us, for everyone that's holding these KPI options. So it just has this kind of neat community piece of it that I like, even aside from the economic incentives and the outcomes. So I want to talk about, and then I'll sort of open up for questions. The super Umans are just finished their Coordinape round, like last week. And they did it with these KPI options that are each backed by one UMA token. And when they mature at the end of September, they're redeemable. They will be redeemable for the total locked value in outcome products. And the payout function is that between 0 and 10,000 ETH. So if we get TVL of 5,000 ETH, then each one is worth 0.5 UMA. And we decided to denominate in ETH, of course, so that it was sort of less susceptible to overall market fluctuations. We previously did one in USD, and that was the one that I forget who chimed in. Alex, I think, chimed in and said he got some of the KPI option airdrop, the initial one. We did that in dollars, and that was a bit of a mistake because the market sort of tanked, and that made it so they didn't pay out very well. Just as an aside, the cool outcome though is people like made friends and stuck around, like even though they didn't get paid particularly well for that round. And so, yeah, I think the sort of closing thesis before we jump into some chat is incentives mean accountability is baked into tokens. So that's the KPI option thing. And the reason I use the word accountability here is because it really allows a DAO or any organization to sort of optimistically hire a group of people and say like, hey, you get this out, you get this payout if this goal is achieved. But instead of having to hire and pay a salary and then measure accountability and then like put in managers and everything else that's required to like pay people salaries, you can bake that accountability into the tokens. Then the other problem that we've had since day one with the KPI options has been the distribution. So when when you do your first airdrop, it's pretty easy. You just sort of like choose your qualifying criteria, and maybe it's some on-chain thing for an airdrop. But as you build a community with relationships and people that are working harder and less hard, et cetera, you want to make sure that you attribute those tokens to the right people. And that's where Coordinape can come in. There's this cool double layered thing where you want to attribute the tokens you want to give the tokens to the people who sort of work the hardest, but you also now have a selfish incentive here. You want to give the tokens to the people who will make your tokens worth more. And so it really I think that incentive is baked into the sort of the normal version of Coordinape too, right? If you're giving out tokens, and you're holders of those team tokens. But this sort of makes it a lot more salient because there might be like a 3-month timeline where the payout comes in. So that's the big picture. I don't want to just monologue. I think people probably glaze over a little bit when I monologue. So would love to hear questions, or just sort of wrap with Coordinape. Combine these things.
Yeah, I have a question. Crab Singer here with Coordinape. When you're talking about using Coordinape for a circle, does the circle distribute KPI options, or is there something else that you're distributing? Like, how do the two mechanisms combine exactly? Or
Sure.
What are some options around?
Yeah. So what we did this epic is we distributed give, and then we used those balances to tell us how to distribute the KPI options to those addresses. My understanding is once Coordinape adds, or maybe it's being added right now, adds the functionality to do on-chain distribution, that it could work just like that. You'd sort of just load the ERC20 KPI options into Coordinape, and then it would sort of flow from there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
I have a question, Ivy from Coordinape. How do you see the various use cases? Because I guess my skepticism is like someone who's highly skilled, I don't know if they're going to be willing to like wait for pay based on a KPI. They may be willing to wait for a bonus for a KPI, but how do you envision like this might be good for community circle members, but like once you have proven yourself and you kind of move up within the DAO, they tend to move towards a salary like payout. So how do you envision like this being used in like various like comp methods, I guess?
Sure. I actually wouldn't too much. I don't think that's a hard answer, meaning that I'm sure that there's ways to sort of set it up, but I think you have the right idea with the bonus approach. And essentially this circles back around, Ivy, to that thing I said about accountability, where if you want to start moving towards a salary model and you want to incentivize people to put in full time, you probably need to pay them in liquid funds, right? And so really kind of has to do with maybe the group that you're targeting and what kind of working group you're trying to build. I can speak with the superhumans. This has been a point of tension over time, where some people are in there and they're sort of able. They're kind of moonlighting, or they're probably working in the DAO while they're at the office, which I absolutely would have done if DAOs had been around when I worked in an office. And those people can sort of afford to wait, and they just put in half time. But it doesn't work for everyone. And so I would say that knowing when to use this is probably the right answer to that. And I also think that you could easily have a Coordinape, basically multiple Coordinape rounds. One might be this kind of bonus and optimistic incentive sort of round, and then you might have a team of core contributors that are on a salary basis that would run around for that purpose. But yes, it's a very good question and definitely an ongoing thing. Go ahead.
Clayton, I think we've talked a little bit about this casually in conversations, but how is a KPI circle different than a bounty from your point of view? Because really a bounty is saying, I want this specific thing done. A KPI is similar. Is it the the way it's gradient versus binary, or how do you think about that?
Sure. Yeah, the main difference I think is that it's a shared bounty, and it's one that I think the gradient piece is part of it, and the fact that you're giving it out to multiple people, and it's sort of also it's almost just a different way of psychologically presenting it too. So you could actually do a bounty KPI option that was literally like, I want Zach to integrate KPI options with Coordinape, and I'll give him $1,000 if he does it, and I just like send it to you. Well, that's just like a bounty, but psychologically, you've just received a thing for free, even if it's going to be valueless if you don't do the thing. I think psychologically that has kind of a cool impact. But even aside from that, the real difference is the community side. It's the side of giving it out to a bunch of people so that they have a shared goal and a shared outcome in a very clear way. I think one of the problems we see with the kind of the V0 crypto economic model, I think, for communities was like, we're all token holders, and so we want to see the value go up, which is awesome, except the market is so ridiculous and the prices move for reasons that are completely separate from what the protocol's up to, typically. So it's hard to feel like that's actually moving the needle. And so this allows you to make it more bite-sized. So I would say it falls on a spectrum that bounties also fall onto.
Great, that's helpful.
And the thing that I like about the idea of working with Coordinape or using these with Coordinape is just really this multi-tiered angle, where you have the people deciding how many each people get, but then the payout being based on the outcome. It ends up being just a really good way. My goal, I don't think we're here yet, and this is a separate conversation, but my goal would be where you could have a plug and play community, more or less, that can sort of combine Coordinape for distribution and KPI options for accountability, and really like allow the community to self-govern. Or govern's not quite the right word, but self-organize the economics anyway.
Yeah. I think in our conversation, something that is intriguing to me too is when I hear the word KPI, it tends to be like a very hard quantitative target, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It can also be like 10 blog posts written, or something that actually leaves is a hard target, but leaves a lot of flexibility. And I think for some protocols, having a very open Coordinape circle for all the great things that contributors can just come do has worked. And I think there's also clearly an opportunity for protocols to add a little bit more, structure, directionality for specific things that they want. They may not have a bounty that's as, tightly scoped, but they can sort of directionally point the community at places. And so it's a nice balance of that structure and emergence for contributions. That was initially what really excited me about what you guys are doing. And I got stoked on the ability for us to collaborate more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like that these tools are composable by nature. So, we use Coordinape for this purpose without like asking Zach first. Actually, the backstory here is I hopped on the end of a Twitter space and just sort of mentioned to Zach, like, oh yeah, we're using Coordinape with these KPI options. So it's cool because you can already do it today. There's nothing that needs to be built. It's just maybe a question. There's different angles we could go with this, right? We could just put out a blog post that tells you how to do it, or we could possibly integrate these things. My like in the front end, my concern is basically explaining all this stuff to people, right? Like Coordinape has its own sort of steps that you need to go through and understand how they work. And then KPI options, I just did a presentation to tell you how they work. It's like, it requires that much bandwidth to understand. And so that's a concern I do have generally with KPI options. It has been a friction point. If it's not sort of a big enough event, people might not put in that mental energy that's so precious.
I think a blog post is a really interesting idea. And I know that on our team, we've talked a bunch about creating different pieces of content, describing some of the unique ways that people are using Coordinape. And this really feels like it meets that criteria. So maybe that would be a good way to go.
Yeah, that would be a good place to start, I should think. The other thing I'll mention here is that so Outcome Finance, which, like I mentioned, is kind of the spinoff from UMA, and it owns these KPI option products and some other DAO tools. We have a group called the Outcome Gang, which includes like Orca and Superfluid and Gnosis Safe and a couple of other partners. And essentially, the Outcome Gang's mission is to work together to sort of bring some of these solutions together and to help people. To help the teams basically work together, because these things are composable, but I think there's always going to be like optimizations we can make. So I'd love for Coordinape to join the Outcome Gang, because I think that's, we could do a Twitter space along with the blog post, and maybe just sort of test it out, see if people are interested in doing this or not, see if it scratches an itch.
That sounds awesome. Another question. Is UMA's optimistic oracle used to validate that KPI options have been reached for off-chain KPIs?
Yes, that's exactly right. So just to give a couple line backstory on that, UMA's oracle is an optimistic oracle, which means that instead of needing a solid price feed, you instead just ask. Excuse me. You make a request for a piece of data, and then anyone can submit the answer, and then it could be disputed. And without going into too much more detail, the oracle works really well. It's worked for about 2 years and secures hundreds of millions of dollars. And so it's exactly that. You parameterize this to ask the oracle, hey, what's the TVL of UMA? Or hey, did 10 blog posts get written? And you do have to provide a little bit of instruction, because you can't just be like, hey, did Zach do a good job? Right? If you ask the oracle that, you're probably not going to be very satisfied with the type of response you get. So yeah, it does use the oracle, and that's why this is an example of trustware, where you have, or trustlessware, I guess I would think is a more intuitive way to call it, where you have this, you have a token that's going to pay out, and so it makes it automatic and decentralized and trustless.
What does that dispute process look like? Like say Reese was supposed to update the docs and Ivy's like, nah, he didn't do it. Like how does she flag that as something that needs to be addressed?
Sure. So as long as you parameterize the kind of request such that like UMA token holders can look at it and understand exactly what you're asking, the dispute, excuse me, my girlfriend's cooking something spicy. The dispute process, close the door here. The dispute process and the proposal process is all bonded. So the person who says, yes, Zach did the work, will have to, if it isn't disputed, but someone else can dispute it. But essentially they would want to be confident that they're right in disputing it, because otherwise they would lose money. And when there's a dispute, it goes to the UMA token holders to sort of analyze and vote on. There's a reward associated with voting successfully. And yeah, like I don't know how far down the UMA optimistic oracle rabbit hole we want to go down, but that's the high level answer.
Cool. No, that makes sense. And so with the outcome protocol, with that, that's just going to, like, if someone disputes one of those outcomes, is that going to be in the outcome and you guys are just going to route it to UMA, or is there a separate
So it's
front
all,
end, I guess?
yeah, it's not a separate front end. It's all sort of routed through UMA. So when one of these KPI options, no, that's a good question. So the outcome finance development really doesn't change a whole lot on the back end. When the KPI options mature, there's going to be a request to the oracle that says, hey, what's the TVL of UMA? And anyone can propose it. You can set up a bot to propose it if you want, but for these, usually it's a person. And the person's going to place a bond and yada, yada, yada. So, and I don't think we've ever had a KPI option be disputed. The submissions have always been, apparently good. the one thing to note here is it's not like the Coordinape person has to dispute it. Anyone can earn money by disputing it. And so if there's evidence that they're wrong, then there's a financial opportunity for anyone at all to step in and flag it. Which is also a bit why you need to make it like somewhat clear, right? Because anyone at all needs to be able to look at the situation and look at sort of public information and realize that there's a dispute that needs to happen, as opposed to it being like a super subjective or internal thing.
Right. And so follow up on that is like when someone validates it or disputes it, do they get paid a slice of that UMA KPI reward, or do they get paid in a different way?
Mm-hmm. When you launch the KPI options, when the DAO launches the KPI options, it actually I can't remember if it's when they launch or when they request, but essentially you put up a requester. You can put up a requester reward, but you also could put up none, and basically you could propose the answer yourself. And essentially, what's cool about that is like anyone in Coordinape or anyone receiving these KPI options would have an incentive to propose an answer so they can get them resolved, but they would have to place a bond, and that's where that bond could be slashed if they lied or were wrong somehow. Yeah, so that's kind of the flow. UMA secures Polymarket, which is the prediction market, and they pay $20 per request, and so anyone can go on to our Oracle and say, yeah, the 76ers won the basketball game, and they have to post $4,000 bond plus no, just that $4,000 bond. As long as no one disputes it after 2 hours, they get their $4,000 plus $20 back. And that number, those ratios have been sort of experimented with for Polymarket. We started at $50, but it was actually like sort of too high. $20 is enough, even though you're risking 4,000. It's led to a healthy market of proposers and disputers.
Cool.
Yeah. Curious to throw out a question to people here, like I don't know if there's DAOs you're in. Apollo actually mentioned this at the beginning of the call, like where if this conversation is maybe stirring up anything for you about how these combinations could be used, or what would sort of benefit from the application of Coordinape plus outcome KPI. Apollo, you'd mentioned it in the context of Bankless DAO. I see the Real Tune is on here. He's always been a big proponent for pull together KPI options. I don't know if pull together has used Coordinape though.
Yeah, they have, I think. I recall seeing a few of them running around.
Cool.
Yeah, pull together is definitely it's definitely been a long time Coordinape user. So yeah, I don't know if either of those folks are available to come off mute or not to share. Yeah, you know, I'm certainly buzzing and thinking about ways that you know, kind of thinking about the spectrum and gradient of how defined you want the outcomes of a circle to be, and the different ways that DAOs could use this to, like I said, I sort of think about it as putting some directive guardrails, but not necessarily, you know, defining too tightly what the outcomes are they're trying to achieve, and potentially add the really nice optionality and mix for people to you know, point their contributors in a certain direction, but still leave room for emergence and sort of the kind of self-sovereignty, creativity, and self-direction that we value in DAOs. So, yeah, I'm super excited about the possibilities. But to turn back to your question, yeah, if anyone here wants to point out ways that they either have or could use it in their DAO, welcome to hear that as well.
Yeah, sorry guys, I was doing some yard work, so I couldn't talk when Clayton first asked me. One thing that I think is interesting that I would like to experiment with is so in some of the guilds in Bankless DAO, we've noticed like coordinate farming. Um, we really don't have any like gating mechanisms set up in a lot of our guilds. So like in order to participate in a coordinate round, you just need to have a tag, like you're in the education guild or you're in the writers guild or whatnot. And we noticed that some people who aren't really active or participating, they um they select the tags and then they have access to coordinate, and then maybe two or three people like allocate all the gift tokens to each other. So we've noticed that some inactive people are actually receiving more gift tokens than active contributors. So I was interested in maybe using KPI options as a way to reward engagement. So in the coordinate round, the recipients receive the KPI options, and they're redeemable based on your engagement level throughout the month. So maybe if you've attended X amount of meetings, then your multiplier goes up by a little bit. Or if you vote on governance polls, or if you complete some tasks or bounties, then your multiplier increases. So your KPI options actually become more valuable when it comes time to redeem them. So that way the active users can actually get rewarded for being active, and the inactive users can't farm the coordinate rounds. That's where my wheels were turning when I first saw this particular convo on Twitter, and then I joined and I started hearing Clayton talk about how the superhumans use KPI options and how they're not redeemable until the end of September. That's where the idea that I came up with.
Thanks for that, Apollo. Really appreciate that. And it's kind of cool because you're touching on something that's kind of in the works. So what you just shared included basically, I would call them individual KPIs. So, did you attend calls? Did you, I don't know, make commits on GitHub, for example? Now that is different than the KPI options I've pitched here today, because those would be based on, it would be based on how an individual's behaved. And Outcome is actually working on that right now. It's called the optimistic rewarder. And essentially, it would allow you to do both things. It would allow you to parameterize a DAO-wide KPI, but then also have it sort of be personalized. And so there might be, you could easily imagine what you just described as a multiplier. So you'd have the TVL payout function times the kind of personal metrics that you've achieved. What I find interesting about this conversation, though, is that almost starts to overlap a little bit with what Coordinape is doing. The social attestation is meant to, I think, Zach, go ahead and chime in, is meant to kind of stop, is basically meant to catch this kind of thing, right? Because people can look at this and analyze it and say, well, so-and-so did so much work, et cetera. Creating these personalized KPI options would, possibly overlap with what Coordinape's trying to do. And yeah, just that. It's very fascinating stuff. I'm curious actually to ask Coordinape team about like different ways you all are working on kind of fixing the problem that Apollo shared. And then we actually have the same issue. It's slightly different, where I don't think superhumans are colluding, but I do notice that people who are in all of the teams end up getting more tokens, I think, just by some sort of default. Whereas it's not necessarily reflective of the people that might be just in one team and hustle quite a lot. So curious how, from Coordinape side, like how maybe you all have hacked that, or where your thought is on that.
Yeah, I would say specific to the issue that Apollo raised. Right now we rely a lot on the admins.
I can see he's trying to talk. Can anyone else hear him?
Oops.
I can hear Zach.
Am I okay? I'm audible.
Yes. Clayton, can you hear me?
There we go. I'm back now. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, this issue of basically what Apollo called farming, people that are in circles. We're relying a lot on admins to be able to recognize and see that behavior, and hopefully, they can remove and opt people out through the settings. So make sure that people aren't able to opt themselves in. Kind of, it's like one strike you're out is what a lot of protocols have done. So when they see that behavior, those people are blocked from being able to send or receive give. However, we're also looking at lots of different options for NFT gating, token gating, basically ways to make sure and ensure that people that are part of a circle have been vouched in and aren't just there by tagging and self-selection. Would actually love to follow up with you, Apollo, and the Bankless team to understand a little bit more that dynamic that you're talking about and see if we can help find some ways to solve that. And then, more broadly, there is sort of a fundamentally subjective nature, when people are rewarding each other. So to what you mentioned, Clayton, this challenge, we've called it before like the silent genius problem. But when there's someone that's more visible, part of a lot of circles, by nature connects to more people throughout the project, as opposed to someone who's doing back-end dev work and only working with one other person, but is obviously super critical and valuable to the effort. How do we make sure that we're getting closer to that value in and value out ideal? Some of the ways that we're prototyping dealing with that is actually having more feedback, follow-up, retrospective, so ways for teams to kind of do sense making on their circles and better understand what's happening or what happened and why, and then create actual agreements to how do we want to deal with this in the future. Being more clear expectations and commitments about how we want to be distributing give. And then some other protocols have done some creative things like giving certain folks much larger allocations of give to distribute. High context individuals who might know that back-end dev is doing really valuable work that's not connected as much or doesn't have as much availability or visibility rather, will have more give so that people that basically have a good line of sight to everything that's going on, trusted folks in the core team of the protocol will have more give to sort of balance that out from the community point of view. So it's definitely something that we see and we're thinking about and are actively working with protocols to to create tools for, so that if they're having that issue too, they can address it. And
Nice.
and I guess
Yeah.
the last thing I'd say is just a plug that Coordinape team is here to help solve these exact kind of issues and pretty responsive in our Discord. So if you're noticing this or struggling with it in a circle that you're working on, come give us a shout. And our roadmap our roadmap is directly informed by the use cases and needs and challenges our users are having.
No, that's really good to know, Zach. I think I'll take advantage of that. We just finished this give allocation, and there was definitely a few silent geniuses that did not get rewarded well enough. And I think it just had to do with like how they chose to spread their time, whether it was across multiple roles or deeply within one role. And so, it would be cool to troubleshoot that. And we have like a 3-month window before we'll do the next one. I think there might be some internal kind of reorganization that like the Superhuman DAO will self-manage. It's up to them if they do that. But otherwise, we basically have a few months to get it right and learn from this iteration. But I basically think it's worth it to iterate and try to get this right, because it's sustainable and scalable and repeatable and universal, right? If we can get this formula right, then we can use it. And so I see kind of the purpose of the DAO doing this is not only the first order effect of the outcomes that we want to see in the community building, but the second order effect of like actually dogfooding these products and learning how to nail it. So yeah, I'm dedicated to figuring it out.
Totally. I'd also offer that another thing that we're working toward is, you mentioned like formulas towards getting it right and making it scalable. Like we have plans around creating a strategy module which would allow in the future circles to create their own kind of rule sets and ways that they might refine the way that give flows out among the circle using various mechanics. So we're hoping that like that research adds up eventually to having a programmatic approach for some DAOs to kind of like aid in repairing some of these issues, or just sort of like fitting out their circles to their exact needs and kind of the spaces that they're trying to compensate. So
Nice. That sounds very
another
promising.
thing we're trying to make. Yep.
It's also kind of cool to think about the, I guess, like the structure of the DAO and how they choose to receive the give or receive the KPI options or tokens. I guess I'm not sure what point I'm making here, other than I know in our case with the superhumans, they have like 9 teams and anyone can opt to be on any team. And then we had like 70 people giving out give. And so we had some issues here around like people were being asked to give to people that didn't have context about. And then also just the team separation, I think, led to some inequalities. And so I'd be curious to sort of figure out if this should happen on Discord or should happen on the strategy module on the Coordinape side, or if there's an interplay there. That wasn't really a straight up question, just me blabbing.
Yeah, and I think the answer, at least in the short term, is going to be both. Kind of again borrowing Orca's trustware and socialware framing. I think we're going to be blended for this foreseeable future. But one of the things we're excited about these strategies is that they'll actually become templates that other folks will be able to use. So as people find various ways to solve these issues, they'll be able to share those strategies and other people can adopt them.
Yep.
And so, it'll be a sort of collective intelligence, wisdom of the crowd ways to solve some of these issues as well that you'll be able to adopt. So, we're definitely keen for these strategies to be developed. That's on our roadmap for sure.
Taking advantage of the wisdom of the crowds is exactly what we're all about. So I like that framing. So now that we've done this sort of conversation about KPI options and just more high level, like what we're all trying to accomplish here, I'd love to invite Coordinape to join the Outcome Gang. It's definitely a good project in the space, and I think also a really good like composability factor. Like I feel like every other team in the Outcome Gang is more or less composable with Coordinape. So if you all are up for that, sort of what does it mean to join, quote unquote? You have a representative, probably a team member, join the Telegram group, which is just the other Outcome Gang members. And then what we will do is occasional Twitter space events, and then also just being able to chat internally. If you want to ask Fran of Superfluid how streaming tokens might work with Coordinape, he's right there, that kind of thing. Essentially, the idea is that the teams that are building this DAO tooling can start to work together a little bit. So I'd love if the Coordinape wanted to hop on board with us. That'd be cool.
I can say absolutely. We'd love to.
Awesome.
Who wouldn't want to join the Outcome Gang? That's right. That's definitely something you want on your Twitter profile. But yeah, let's definitely follow up on that, Clayton. That's something that sounds like would be awesome to be a part of, and really useful.
Nice.
Cool. And I see we're getting on our time here. So I want to really thank you for the time and coming to share with us, and thanks for everyone for joining. And there will be a recording of this available if that's of interest. And we do this every couple weeks. We always have big brain folks like Clayton to come and talk about what's happening in the DAO space. And so, hope to see lots of you back here for our next community call in a couple weeks. And really appreciate all the info.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me crash your community call, and appreciate the attendance and questions and stuff. So everyone have an awesome day.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Clayton. Good stuff, and look forward to more.
Cheers.
All right, and appreciate everyone showing up. we'll see you in a couple weeks for the next one.
Thanks, guys. This will be posted to YouTube and to Spotify shortly after this call. So thank you guys for coming. We'll catch you later.
Spotify. Never thought to put community calls on Spotify. I'm learning so many things here.
Reese
Right.
is not a silent genius. He is.
No.
He's an out and about genius.
Well, good. I'm giving him all my give.
Oh, man. I'm blushing. See you guys.
Bye, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Peace,
Great
everybody.
session. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you, Zach.
Thanks so much. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming.